Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into one of the most absolutely astonishing examples of how sheer endurance, just raw persistence, literally changed the laws of an entire empire. We're talking about William Wilberforce, and we'll see how an almost impossible political change wasn't achieved by being the loudest person in the room, but by being the one person who absolutely point-blank refused to quit. He was mocked, he was attacked, he suffered political defeats. You know, when we think of historical victories, we usually picture these quick, glorious turning points, right? But the fight against the British transatlantic slave trade? It was grueling. It was a deeply unpopular fight against a massive, powerful system. Bills failed, friends warned him the battle was totally hopeless, and for nearly 2 decades, Wilberforce stood in the British Parliament arguing against one of the most insanely profitable institutions of his age. So what does this all mean? How exactly did one incredibly persistent politician actually change history? Okay, let's dive into this. Because to answer that, we first have to understand the sheer, terrifying size of the monster he was up against.
Section 1. The Impossible Fright.
Now, this wasn't just some moral debate happening in a vacuum. Not at all. It was a head-on collision with the massive economic engine of the British Empire. Wilberforce was facing down deeply entrenched pillars of the economy. We're talking merchants, ships, banks, huge plantations, manufacturers, and entire ports. They all benefited massively from the Atlantic slave system. Enslaved Africans were forced to produce sugar, tobacco, coffee, commodities that basically generated unimaginable wealth for Britain. So abolishing this trade meant dismantling an absolute economic Goliath. This was a classic David versus Goliath battle against incredibly powerful financial interests who quite literally had everything to lose.
Section 2. A profound turning point.
So who actually takes on an impossible fight like that? Well, as a young man, this boy from Hull was wealthy, super socially connected, and an incredibly ambitious Cambridge graduate with a serious gift for public speaking. He enters Parliament in 1780 at just 21 years old. He was even tight friends with William Pitt the Younger, the future prime minister. By all accounts, he was on a fast track for a very comfortable, totally conventional political career. But then, between 1784 and 1785, everything shifts. He experiences this profound religious transformation. He starts taking his Christian faith so seriously that he actually considers leaving politics entirely, thinking it might just be totally incompatible with genuine faith. But then a really crucial conversation changed his entire trajectory. He spoke with John Newton. And incredibly, Newton was a former slave ship captain who had become a clergyman and a fiercely passionate opponent of the slave trade. Newton basically looked at him and told him not to abandon public life. His advice was clear: use your political position for moral reform. That was a real game changer for Wilberforce. He realized his faith and his political responsibilities didn't have to be at odds. They could actually work together to confront massive injustice. From that moment on, fighting the slave trade wasn't just a political goal. For Wilberforce, it became an absolute moral obligation.
Section 3. Defeat after defeat.
But, as we know, righteous conviction definitely doesn't guarantee an easy path. In fact, the reality of this campaign was defined by repeated, crushing failure. A massive hurdle early on was just getting the public to actually care about something happening thousands of miles away. That's where this famous diagram of the slave ship Brooks came in. It was a brilliant, incredibly powerful piece of public education. Before this, the slave trade was mostly just this abstract economic system to the average British citizen. But this image, showing enslaved Africans tightly packed into a ship's hold, completely shattered that illusion. It made the human tragedy violently visible and totally shocked the British public into understanding the real human cost of their prosperity. Wilberforce wasn't just out there saying, slavery is cruel. He was demanding to know how a Christian nation could permit such cruelty. And this specific diagram, it proved that cruelty beyond a shadow of a doubt.
But hey, let's be very, very clear here. Wilberforce did not fight this battle alone. He was essentially the parliamentary champion for an extraordinary, incredibly modern mass political movement. We're talking about a vast abolitionist network. You had Thomas Clarkson out there gathering hard, irrefutable evidence. You had former enslaved people like Olaudah Equiano providing absolutely vital firsthand testimony. And you had ordinary citizens organizing massive public petitions, holding meetings, and handing out pamphlets. The whole shebang. It was this massive collective effort to educate the public and practically force the politicians to finally listen.
Now, the real meaning of persistence becomes incredibly obvious when we trace the timeline here. In 1780, he enters Parliament. By 1789, he makes his first major speech against the trade. But then, well, parliamentary bills failed. Major political crises intervened. The French Revolution completely upended the political climate in Britain, and suddenly, war made politicians incredibly suspicious of any kind of radical reform. And of course, the slave trading interests fought back fiercely. Just imagine for a second introducing a major reform bill and watching it fail, then doing it again and again and again, year after grueling year. His opponents literally just waited around for him to get discouraged and quit, but he kept coming back.
Section 4. The long road to victory. Eventually, slowly, the tide really did begin to turn. After years of struggling, public opposition swelled, and the staggering evidence of brutality just became totally impossible to ignore. And yet, just think about that number, 20. It took nearly 2 decades. 20 long, hard years of constant parliamentary struggle, repeated defeats, and non-stop public campaigning, just to achieve the very first victory in 1807.
But we absolutely have to make a vital distinction here. The 1807 Slave Trade Act abolished the trade of enslaved people. It successfully stopped the British ships. But, and this is a huge but, it did not immediately abolish the institution of slavery itself. Slavery remained completely legal across the empire, and thousands upon thousands continued to suffer. Wilberforce knew his work wasn't finished, because true persistence, it means not stopping at the very first milestone. So, relying heavily on that broader movement as his own health started to heavily decline, he spent the final years of his life fighting for the complete and total abolition of slavery. Finally, the 1833 Slavery Abolition Act passed, amazingly just days before Wilberforce died at the age of 73.
Section 5. The legacy of persistence.
So how can we actually apply Wilberforce's monumental blueprint for systemic change today? Well, there are some amazing lessons here. First off, persistence matters. Some victories literally take decades, and that's okay. Second, political change absolutely requires public support. You just can't legislate in a vacuum. Third, moral conviction has the power to deeply influence and shape political priorities. Fourth, while you definitely need a massive movement, having one person acting as a catalyst inside the system is absolutely crucial. And fifth, victory is sometimes only the beginning. Wilberforce proved that a just cause can lose today without being lost forever. He quite literally turned sheer endurance into a formidable political weapon.
As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a final, provocative thought derived straight from his story. When injustice becomes normal, will persistence be your courage? History isn't always changed by the loudest person in the room. Sometimes it's changed by the person who simply refuses to stop coming back. Thank you so much for diving into this truly fascinating slice of history with me today, and keep exploring how real change actually happens.